Tonight, I am going to be continuing talking about the book Karma Chagme's Mountain Dharma as it was taught by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. And I'm going to start today with what is described as Chapter 1, Precious Garland, a list of contents to prevent disorder. Now, you could look at this as being the actual beginning of the book, that the Namtar that precedes this, which is a biography of Karma Chagme that he wrote, was in the text further. Rinpoche presented it first to kind of give people an idea of who Karma Chagme was. And I thought about this in chapter that I'm going to be talking about to begin with. And it didn't take me long to come to the conclusion that you can't come up with a table of contents before the book is written. So obviously this part was written after the rest of the book was already transcribed. And a lot of what is in this first chapter before you get to the contents are teachings that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave, rather than the actual words of Karma Chagme that are in the book. So I thought that was an important point to bring up. And after looking at the contents of all four books in a little more depth and actually going over to the other three volumes a little bit, I have come to the conclusion that I am not going to talk about the other three volumes, at least in their entirety. If I do teach them, it'll be on selected chapters in those books, because there's a lot of information that, quite honestly, I'm not qualified to talk about, and things that I have never done, and the things that most people probably would not need to use. The thing is that these writings of Karma Chagme are intended for people that are in retreat. So there's a lot of things in there that, unless you're in retreat, it might help you in various ways that it's not directly related to what you're going to be doing when you're not in retreat. But this first chapter is the first volume is very important, because it talks about some of the very basic ideas and concepts and so forth that are in Buddhism, and it goes through Nundro, all four practices of Nundro. I find it interesting that this first chapter, the subtitle is a list of contents to prevent disorder. I'm not sure why that was phrased that way. Might be interesting when you come to the question and answers that have a little discussion on that. So he begins this section with Namo Guru Deva Dakini Sarva Siddhi Hung. And basically he's saying homage to all the Dakinis and asking them to bestow siddhi or spiritual attainment on him. Then he pays homage to his own guru, Choki Wangchuk, quote, the one who is the knower of everything, who is the master of the mandala, who is always gazing upon every sentient being with tremendous compassion. Then he talks a little bit about the circumstances under which he is doing his present retreat. That it's in the eastern part of Kham, and Kham, of course, is where Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche came from, where Trangu Rinpoche came from, and a lot of other famous Kagyu gurus have come from over the centuries. It's the eastern part of Tibet, and it is considered by many Tibetans that aren't from Kham that the people from Kham are not as smart as other people, that the equivalent of being considered hillbillies. And in fact, Lama Gyamtso, the translator, once said this about Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's Kham accent. He said that it would be the equivalent if a teacher was teaching in English and talking like this. Shucks, y'all, let's talk about the Dharmakaya. So it's a thick accent. I didn't realize how good my understanding of Tibetan was until Tai Situ Rinpoche came to retreat and he spoke proper Lhasa Tibetan, and I actually started understanding words. And I'm not great at Tibetan, but Rinpoche, his accent is so thick. So from Kham, he was facing the Yangtze River, and the mountain that he was on is called Glorious Mountain. He said the land below was triangular in shape, meaning that there would be mountains on three sides. And then the sky above was framed by two mountains. So you had a triangular shape to that part of the sky. Now, what this means to him is Vajrayogini stands on a throne of crossed triangles. And so here you had these two triangles, the ground and the sky. So this, he says it was like doing the retreat within Vajrayogini's mandala. He started teaching from this retreat in 1659, our calendar, to give you an idea of when this was. And the monk who requested the teaching was Tsondru Gyamtso, and the name means ocean of diligence. And here Rinpoche put in the modifier tremendous diligence. I think that is implied by ocean. Again, diligence is joyful exertion. So this is you might say, the setting for this. Then Karma Chagme says emaho, which means it's wondrous, exclamation of joy, wonder, amazement. Then Karma Chagme says that he's nothing special. And he lists a bunch of credentials like expert, scholar. One I thought I would explain a little bit, master of the winds, nadis, and channels. And he said, that's not me. That this might be other people, but it's not him. Now, the winds, nadis, and channels, I came across these for the first time in 1989 during the first 10-day teaching, which was Rinpoche teaching from the Profound Inner Meeting. And winds, nadis, and channels has to do with the subtle body. And very advanced practitioners and will work with these. He says he's not a master yogi. He doesn't have any qualities, and on and on and on. Extremely humble. And then, as I said, a lot of this chapter is things that Rinpoche said about him rather than things that he wrote down himself. A story that Rinpoche related was the time that Karma Chagme went to Lhasa to meet the fifth Dalai Lama. The purpose of this meeting was the Dalai Lama wanted to see and meet Karma Chagme and determine if he was fit to write Dharma books. I mentioned this in a previous class that this was a time of the Dalai Lamas unifying Tibet and unifying their control over the country of Tibet. It was much more disunited, little areas that were controlled by one faction and another faction, similar to little kingdoms in the medieval Europe. So the Dalai Lama, the fifth Dalai Lama, was trying to unify Tibet as a country and trying to take control over what was considered appropriate Dharma. That, needless to say, back then there were charlatans just like there are today. So the Dalai Lama said a person that would be qualified to publish text, Dharma text in Tibet, should, first of all, be very learned in all the fields of philosophy and science in Buddhism. He or she should have achieved a direct vision of the deity. And the third quality would be to have achieved a high realization in meditation. So the Dalai Lama, the fifth Dalai Lama, asked Karma Chagme about these qualities. And of course, Karma Chagme said, well, I have none of them. And that wasn't the answer that the Dalai Lama was looking for. So he decided, well, he's not fit to be publishing these texts. And he decided that he needed to be punished, keep him from writing more of these texts. So he decided, well, I'll either cut off his thumb and finger so he couldn't hold a pen or a pencil or a brush, or at least break them. He went to bed with that thought, and he had a dream that night of him trying to cut off Amitabha's fingers. And at that point, when he woke up, he realized that maybe I shouldn't do that. In fact, he decided that Karma Chagme was an emanation of Amitabha. Here is a quote by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. When Karma Chagme begins this chapter by saying, I am not a master of the winds, nadis, and channels, and so on, we need to remember that this is the manner in which this teacher always presents himself, and that what he really is an emanation of Amitabha himself. So Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was convinced that he was an emanation of Amitabha. And actually, I'm not sure if Karma Chagme said this or not, but probably he didn't. But Rinpoche said that the main points of every teaching of the Sutrayana and Tantrayana have become so clear in his mind that they became like a reflection of something in a mirror to him. And that as a result of his advancing age, he felt it was time to put these things on paper so that they would be preserved. Now, there's an explanation of why these teachings are valid. And the first point is, by the blessings of the Lama and the Yidam, the main points that are necessary for practicing and achieving enlightenment are very clear in my mind. That is a quote from Karma Chagme. Then the teachings just flow from his mind, that they are endless. These are spontaneous. He talks about how he does not practice or he does not study in advance. He does not go to texts. I'm not going to be quoting from the great masters in this, during these teachings or in this book. Quote, I have presented them in the hope that other ignorant individuals like myself will benefit. Here is a quote from Rinpoche. It is said, and it is very true, that if you become familiar with all 54 chapters of Riwo Cho, which is Mountain Dharma, you will have everything you need concerning how to conduct a proper solitary retreat. Now, to go into this in a little more detail, there are many, many texts available about doing a solitary retreat. And in fact, the category of these types of texts are mountain Dharma texts, because you would do a solitary retreat in the mountains in Tibet. So mountain Dharma is more a category of books on solitary retreat. So this is Karma Chagme's Mountain Dharma. So to go on here, it talks about how it's impossible to study all of these books, much less understand them about solitary retreat. And Karma Chagme put these teachings together in a very succinct, clear, understandable form. It is a mistake to think that, well, if I just read the right text, that I will somehow or another get it, as opposed to just practicing properly. Or I can't properly practice unless I read the right text. Da 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 da. Take your pick how you want to phrase it. What came to my mind was a man that was in my retreat that I did. He really liked books. He was very, very intelligent. He came into retreat with 3 boxes of books. And now this was before the internet. And of course, even if they would have been there, we didn't have access. But through, hard copy of catalogs and snail mail, he was able to accumulate another 10 boxes of Dharma books while he was in retreat. I doubt if he read them all. I don't know, but this is kind of the point that Karma Chagme is getting at here, is that it's more important to be very, very focused, and his instructions they get right to the point. So he goes on to say that when you are in retreat, how do you relate to your guru when you can't be with him constantly? He suggests that this is the text to use. Take this text into retreat with you, and if a question arises, go to the text for the answer. And he finishes up this chapter. Before you get to the contents, the actual table of contents, he finishes up with this quote: "The moment you are not clear, read that chapter. It is like having a guru there ready to explain everything. You do not have to attain 50 or 60 different volumes of textbooks. You become well acquainted with this text. You have everything necessary to achieve enlightenment. You have all you need to successfully undertake any practice, from the most basic to the complete Tantrayana." It's a Karma Chagme quote. So as you can see, he wasn't saying, "Oh, well, I know nothing, go somewhere else." He said, "I put it all in this book." Now, volume 1 contains chapters 1 through 12. Volume 2, 13 through 21. And as I mentioned, the volume 1 contains everything from a beginner through Mahamudra Nundro. That's an important point to make, that the Nundro that we do, the full name is Mahamudra Nundro. And the Mahamudra teachings are in the Kagyu lineage. So this also means it's Kagyu Nundro. It's not Nyingma Nundro, it's not Galupa Nundro, it's Kagyu Nundro. Then here is a description that I got online from Google Books of volume 2. The complete path of Mahamudra from initial experience to full realization. There is emphasis on how to conduct a proper retreat, including the use of geomancy in determining the appropriate site, the longevity practices of White Tara and Seringma Chu practice, and how to use compassion as protection from fear and danger. I don't have anything that summarizes the volume 3 or volume 4. I have used some, I can't remember which, whether it was 3 or 4 or even 2, but there was a volume, a chapter that I used when I was teaching on the Bardo on choosing a pure realm. And so there are things that it would be good for us to learn a little bit about that chapter, because that's where we want to go. So that's pretty much about these 4 volumes. It seemed to me there was one chapter that I remember what it was. In volume 3, there is a chapter, chapter 29, and it says a Homa, Homa, a Homa for those with few resources who are diligent in practice. A Homa, I am more familiar with the name fire puja. So that's what a Homa is a fire puja. There's really nothing else here that I wanted to point out at this time. So on that note, I am going to chapter 2 here, which is seeing it makes you smile. Ordinary beings entering the gates of Dharma. So, in this chapter, this is, you might say, an introduction. This is a guide for ordinary beings that want to enter the gate of Dharma, meaning start on the path. To begin with, Karma Chagme again humbles himself. He disparages himself for having many different faults. And Rinpoche points out that Chagme means non-attachment. The Sanskrit is raga asaya. I might be pronouncing that. It's probably asya, asya. This chapter is an introduction to the book. It talks about how it came into being, the conversation between Karma Chagme and Lama Tsondru Gyamtso. This has been discussed a little bit in the beginning. I can't remember if it was a preface or the introduction, but it's been discussed a little bit already. This goes into it in more depth. Karma Chagme started a solitary retreat, and after a year, Lama Tsondru Gyamtso came to him with a request. And obviously they had a relationship already. This isn't that he just suddenly showed up and made this request, but they had a relationship, student-teacher relationship already. And the Lama, he had recently recovered from an illness that could have been fatal. And he realized that he was unable to pacify his suffering, not the illness, but his suffering, his emotional suffering from this illness and the possibility of death. He was not able to pacify this suffering through his practice. And then he realized that he really wasn't prepared for death. So he was thinking that I need to prepare for death, and he wants to live in a solitary retreat until he does die, but he doesn't know how to pick a suitable place. And he says that I have no real experience of accomplishment in the generation and completion stages. These are the two stages of deity practice. And there are many texts on Mountain Dharma that he've not received any reading transmissions, and he has no experiential instructions, and I'm putting quotes around that, experiential instructions. This is guidance through personal experience of the methods that are described in these Mountain Dharma texts. This brush with death, you might say, got him to really examine where he was and his reaction to having this serious illness, and he realized he needed help. You could say he was reaching out to Karma Chagme for help. Here is a quote that Lama Tsondru Gyamtso made to Karma Chagme. You have compiled a great deal of instructions for use in retreat, but up till this point, you have not composed a written text about retreat or Mountain Dharma. Please compose such Mountain Dharma now. And he offered to transcribe the teachings for Karma Chagme. Because of Karma Chagme's age, that he was having what sounds like arthritis in his hands, and writing would be difficult. And of course, he made offerings to Karma Chagme. Now, Karma Chagme's response is that he, first of all, laughs, goes over the essential points of Mountain Dharma as renunciation, being terrified of death, and sustaining the experience of the nature of your mind. Then he says, do a few stanzas of supplication to your guru. Finally, he says, if people come to see you, flee. Go to some other location. Milarepa would do that sometimes. If people would come to him, he would then move to another spot, another cave, another part of Tibet. Khenpo Karta Rinpoche adds this, quote, you have abandoned all concern with where you live, and therefore you have no agenda of establishing anything or maintaining anything. That's how he interprets that flee if people come to see you. Then Karma Chagme humbles himself, he disparages himself, and he says, how can I write a book about mountain Dharma? Lama Tsondru Gyamtso leaves, thinks about this, and returns the next day. And he went through Karma Chagme's, the points in Karma Chagme's biography, his qualities, what he had done, how he had received many, many teachings and transmissions from great lamas, and that great lamas had relied on him, that there are termas and other prophecies that predict his appearance, and that he would be a holder of the teachings. He has completed, or in this case, you have completed many yidam practices in retreat. You are a respected teacher. Many depend on you. You have inspired many people to remain in retreat for life, and on and on and on, things like that. So he ends this conversation with, quote, therefore, please compose a mountain Dharma in accordance with your own personal experiences of retreat practice. Rinpoche adds that we couldn't use a text that exceeds one's experience because it would be all hypothetical. Therefore, the Lama requests from Karma Chagme, please bestow instructions that we can actually use. So that is how he came back to Karma Chagme, and now Karma Chagme, in response, he composed the text. So this is how this text begins, and the beginning of writing down this text. Now, he started this exchange between Karma Chagme and Lama Tsondru Gyamtso in the middle of the winter with short days, long nights. It's cold. Karma Chagme has a full retreat schedule, and then he has practices to do for other people. And as I said, he did not check with texts to get information or to get great quotes and so forth. He just, before sundown each day, the Lama would come, Karma Chagme then would teach whatever came into his mind. Now, the way Rinpoche teaches this is that the Lama was outside of Karma Chagme's hut, exposed to the elements in the wintertime. And he wrote down everything I said exactly as I was saying it, Karma Chagme says. And here is a quote, his fingers rode the horse of the wind. So Karma Chagme felt that he did a very good job of transcribing his words. Karma Chagme continues and says that my mountain Dharma teaching will be free of quotes from the sutras, tantras, commentaries. He says, free of lofty language about emptiness, no poetry. It's just going to be instructions. The instructions will contain everything that you need to know in order to attain awakening. He says that we did not spare ink or paper or quills in writing it down, that everything that he said was written down. And this section ends by, this concludes the introductory section of Karma Chagme's Mountain Dharma. That sounds like an editor's edition, but maybe Karma Chagme did say that. The next section here is titled Song of Precious Human Birth. We're going to go through the four ordinary foundations, the four thoughts that turn one's mind to the Dharma. So we start out with talking about precious human birth. Again, it begins with Namo Guru, which is the invoking the blessings of the Guru, homage to the Guru. So Karma Chagme begins with a list of, this is how I present it, if you want to, and then a list. And so I put some of these down here. Wander in isolation. If you want to remain in retreat, if you want to make meaningful use of your body, your human birth, no regret at the time of your death, the assurance you will be born in the pure realms, certainty that you won't be reborn in the lower realms, and on and on and on about this. And finally, attain Buddhahood. And he finishes that with, then keep my heart advice in your mind. Then he goes on to actually teaching about the precious human birth. He compares a human birth to being like a crop that ripens once every 1,000,000 years. Well, that's a long time between planting and harvesting. And so it's extremely rare to have a human birth compared to the animals that are born in the other realms that are not apparent to us ordinary beings. I have frequently used the example of, want to know how common animals are. I live out here in the country. In the summertime, take a rock that's laying on the ground and flip it over, and underneath there's going to be ants. Lots of ants. There are small insects in tremendous abundance compared to the number of humans in the world. The number of beings in a cup of pond water. Again, tremendous numbers. So the human realm is much less densely populated than the animal realm. So it's extremely rare for there to be Dharma even in the human realm. Aeons can go by before there is actually a Buddha born in the human realm. But we have been born in a fortunate aeon. The Buddha has appeared in this aeon, and the teachings remain, and there are teachers that teach. He says that the teachings will disappear before the next Buddha appears. And then, even though the Buddha appeared and the teachings remain, many countries have never had the teachings, and in many countries the teachings have disappeared. But here you have encountered them. He then goes into some other unfavorable conditions that we have avoided, and that is having, you might say, faculties that aren't as developed as most people, that, for instance, blindness or low intelligence or a mind that is incredibly obscured. So we've avoided those negative conditions. We have favorable conditions to practice Dharma. It is now important for us to realize that we need to accumulate the causes of a human birth in our next life. That just because we have a human birth in this life, there's no guarantee that you will be born human in the next life. If you look at the behavior of many human beings that behave in such a way that would be almost impossible for them to have a human birth next life, or if they do have a human birth, the circumstances that it will be born into will basically make it impossible for them to practice Buddhism, even if they do come in contact with it. Look at what's going on in war zones. I'm kind of getting upset just thinking about it. War zones in various parts of the world, how infants, children are being killed, disfigured, their parents being killed, and the chaos and the suffering and the pain. That isn't much of a human birth as far as I'm concerned. So Karma Chagme says that you have to make your human life meaningful in our present lifetime. That he says that we have to protect the roots of our commitment to our three vows to make our life meaningful. And these three vows are the vows of individual liberation, the Bodhisattva vows, and then the Vajrayana vows, or the Samaya vows. The individual liberation vows would be the first two lines of the Chenrezig practice. The Bodhisattva vows would be the second two lines. We have to respect these commitments, and he says immediately confess any minor branch vows that are violated. I guess I didn't talk about Samaya. This gets a little more complicated. I'm not going to talk about it in great detail, but these are vows that are involved with Vajrayana and your commitment to the practice and to your root guru and the gurus that have given you empowerments and instructions and so forth. So he says, immediately confess, and I'm going to say and purify, branch vows that are violated, minor violations. Rinpoche would use the term that these are actually like dents, and you can remove dents. If we do the confession and purification, no problem. So then he goes on to say, use your body by performing prostrations, circumambulate sacred sites, monasteries, stupas, and so forth. And then he says, training in the winds. And this goes back to the channel winds and nadis. So again, this is advanced Tantra. He says, use your speech by reciting mantras during formal practice or by reciting supplications and chanting various liturgical practices. then the way to use your mind is meditate on the generation and completion stages of these sadhanas, and doing Tonglen, which helps generate compassion or cultivate compassion. And he says, the body is like an employee. Keep it busy. Don't overpay it in food, clothing, just enough to keep alive. He then talks about this, and I don't want to explain this in too much detail here, but he says you can generate physical vitality by visualizing the essence of the winds, learning to absorb the essences, the nutritive or vital essences of the four elements through breathing them in. Again, this is an advanced practice. I guess to just give you a little bit of background on this, that in Tantra, we are working with transforming the negative emotions, our kleshas, into wisdom. And it works the same way with the physical substances, the elements, and so forth. And we purify them and they become pure elements, and on and on and on. So I guess I'm going to say I don't want to talk about this too much at this point. Rinpoche doesn't talk about it too much at this point. To go on, Rinpoche has this editorial comment about this: just enough to keep alive, don't overpay in food, clothing, and so forth. Rinpoche's editorial comment is, quote, don't worry and become depressed about how much you have to eat and drink. And we can offer the food before we eat it to the deities that abide within our body. And then you can dedicate the merit that you accumulate to yourself and to others of making this offering. This is really what we do at KTD, and I do at home with that meal chant. The difference is that in Vajrayana, where you have, well, in foundation level in Mahayana, you have the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In our meal chant, we offer to them. In Vajrayana, you have the three roots, the Guru, the Yidams, and the protectors. So here you could offer the food to the three roots. And again, you have, in Vajrayana, you're visualizing yourself as an enlightened being. Now, to end this section, here is another quote. In short, if you do all of this until you die, your human life will have been meaningful and you will have no regret at the time of your death.